verses 1 through 14. It reads, "The king of Aram had great admiration for Naaman, the commander of his army, because through him the Lord had given him great victories. But though Naaman was a mighty warrior, he suffered from leprosy. At this time, Aramean raiders had invaded the land of Israel, and among their captives was a young girl who had been given to Naaman, his wife, as a maid. One day the girl said to her mistress, 'I wish my master would go see the prophet in Samaria. He would heal him of his leprosy.' So Naaman told the king what the young girl from Israel had said. 'Go and visit the prophet,' the king of Aram told him. 'I will send a letter of introduction for you to the king of Israel.' So Naaman started out carrying 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter to the king of Israel said, 'With this letter I present my servant Naaman. I want you to heal him of his leprosy.' When the king read the letter, he tore his clothes in dismay and said, 'Am I God that I can give life and take it away? Why is this man asking me to heal someone with leprosy? I can see he's just trying to pick a fight with me.' But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes in dismay, he sent this message to him. 'Why are you so upset? Send Naaman to me, and he will learn that there is a true prophet here in Israel.' So Naaman went with his horses and his chariots, and he waited at the door of Elisha's house. But Elisha, he just sent a messenger out to him with this message, 'Go and be washed. Wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored, and you will be healed of your leprosy.' But Naaman, he became angry and he stalked away. 'I thought he would certainly come out to meet me,' he said. 'I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of the Lord his God and heal me. Aren't the rivers of Damascus, the Abana, and the Pharpar better than the rivers of Israel? Why shouldn't I wash in them and be healed?' So Naaman turned and went away in a rage. But his officers tried to reason with him and said, 'Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something very difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So you certainly should obey him when he simply says, "Go and wash and be cured." So Naaman went down to the Jordan River and dipped himself 7 times as the man of God had instructed him. And his skin became as healthy as the skin of a young child, and he was healed."
Yeah.
The title of my message today is "God, I will look like a fool for you." I have 3 steps I want to bring to you from this story. Number 1, grab a hold of hope. Number 2, seek the promise. And number 3, submit to the process. Before we get into this, there's a few main characters that I want to go through real quick. So first you have Naaman. Naaman was a man of great authority and position. Because of his position, he was probably well known. He was second in command to the king of Aram. Naaman's name, get this, means pleasant, delightful, agreeable, and beautiful. That indicates that at one point in time, he was a handsome man. Next, you have the king of the Arameans. The Arameans were a persistent enemy of Israel. Then you've got the king of Israel, and as I mentioned, Israel and Aram were not friends, so that makes sense why the king of Israel was so put off with the king of Aram's request. Then you have Elisha the prophet. A prophet in Old Testament times was someone who was used by God to release and communicate his message to the world. Oftentimes they called them seers because they could spiritually see what God was doing and release that. Finally, you have the young girl. Who was this young girl? She still remains nameless to this day, so we really don't know. Verse 2 tells us that the Arameans had invaded Israel and raided it, and among their captives was a young girl who'd been given to Naaman's wife as a maid. In the Hebrew, the words young girl are the words katan and nara'ah, and that means young, insignificant, unimportant, young girl or female servant. More than likely, this young girl, due to her position in life, was probably looked down, looked past, or looked over, and not considered worth much. Her identity isn't revealed to us in this story, and she probably didn't have much status in the home and community in which she lived. But God, This unnamed, insignificant girl is used to play a huge role in a story that is still being told today, as we'll see in step number 1. Grab a hold of hope. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a dream fulfilled is a tree of life." God allowed her tragedy of being stripped from her family and being forced into captivity to act as a catalyst in this epic story of redemption. As God always does, God took what the enemy was using for harm and he used it for good.
Yeah.
But why? Why would this young girl help her captors?
Good job.
How could she not despise them? How could she not hate them? It could be, maybe, that Naaman and his family were kind to her. Maybe they were nice and they treated her well. Or maybe she knew something. Oh wait, hold on. Maybe she knew someone, right? She knew someone that her captors did not know. She must have known the one who is hope, who is greater than leprosy, greater than captivity, greater than tragedy.
Yeah.
At some level, deep within her, she must have known her identity.
Yeah.
She must have known enough about who she is and who her God is that she could not stand by and watch her master suffer.
That's good.
She must have known the one who gives true identity, true worth, and true value. She knew how Naaman could be healed. And so she tells Naaman what she knows, delivering a message of hope.
Yeah.
Naaman grabbed a hold of the hope and he went to his king. So I've asked myself other questions too, like, why? Why would this young girl suggest it to Naaman that he goes to the prophet in Samaria? What would cause him to suddenly have hope, right?
Yeah.
What was in this girl's simple message that would cause him to believe that he could be healed? The answer to this young girl, she was an ambassador of hope. An ambassador is an authorized messenger or representative. Who did she represent? She represented Jehovah Rapha, the one who heals.
Yeah.
God first reveals himself as Jehovah Rapha in Exodus chapter 15, verse 26. If you don't remember, the Israelites in that time, they were wandering the desert, and 3 days they'd been out without water. So they come to an oasis, but the water's bitter. And the oasis is actually called Mara. They grumble to Moses, and Moses does what he always does. He cries out to God, and God tells Moses, pick up this piece of wood and throw it in the water, and it'll become good to drink. So he does, and it becomes good. It's there that God reveals himself as healer when he says, if you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, obeying his commands and keeping all his decrees, then I will not make you suffer any of the diseases I sent on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Wow.
There's been numerous times he sent messages of hope from our spirit-filled church to tell me that what I was engaging with and what I was encountering was truly demonic, that I didn't have to tolerate any of this nonsense because Jesus had already paid the price. He hung on the cross so I didn't have to tolerate any of this nonsense. Not long after that, I was filled with the Holy Spirit and I began to hope again. It was a process of about 3 years from the time that I was in a mental hospital in 2010. But from that time, at 3 years later, I was free from suicide, anxiety, depression, no longer needing any more medications.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, come on!
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesus! That's right. Woo! Now, just like this slave girl, I too am an ambassador of hope.
Yeah,
I know from firsthand experience Jehovah Rapha, the one who heals.
Yeah.
And like that slave girl, I point you to him. You may be in a place where your hope has been deferred. It's my heart's desire that by hearing my stories, my testimonies, my but God's, that you too will be inspired to hope. My desire is that you would come to a place of knowing God as the one who heals. This leads me to my second step, seek the promise. When Naaman got a revelation of hope from the girl, he delivered that revelation of hope to his king, the king of Aram. That king got a revelation of hope and sent him off to the king of Israel to find the hope that's been lost. When Naaman arrives at the king of Israel, unfortunately did not have what Naaman was looking for, so then he sends him to the prophet Elisha. Finally, after submitting himself to 2 kings, Naaman arrives at Elisha's house. At this point, Naaman had gone from city to city and from person to person, seeking hope, refusing to give up. Yeah. Another example that we have is our mighty man of faith of the Bible, Abraham. Romans chapter 4, verses 18 through 22 reads, "Even when there was no reason for hope, Abraham kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations. For God had said to him, 'That's how many descendants you will have.' And Abraham's faith did not weaken, even though at about 100 years of age, he figured his body was as good as dead. And so was Sarah's womb. Abraham never wavered in believing God's promise. In fact, his faith grew stronger, and in this, he brought glory to God. He was fully convinced that God is able to do whatever he promises. Yeah. And because of Abraham's faith, God counted him as righteous. It says that Abraham kept hoping when there was no hope. Why? How could he keep hoping when all hope seems lost? What could possibly happen that would cause him to dig deep and keep hoping year after year after year? I propose that in Genesis 17, when Abraham was 99 years old, that he had an encounter with hope himself. And once he had that encounter, he would not be swayed from his promise. Yeah. When your hope has been deferred, lost, or locked away, when your hope seems inaccessible, you must have an encounter with the one who is hope. Yeah. His name is Jesus. Yeah. And once you've truly encountered Jesus, you too will be compelled to have hope and will refuse to give up on your promise. That's good. For almost a decade, I was in excruciating pain all day, every day from fibromyalgia. Everything hurt all the time. The pain was unmerciful and it was unrelenting, and it kept me from enjoying life. It caused me to be depressed. It pulled me away from all the things that I love, especially my family. When pain dictates every breath of your life, it's exhausting at best. So, I was one of those that grew up in church my whole life. In fact, I was in a church denomination that we went to church 3 times faithfully a week. Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. You know, there's so many wonderful things about my upbringing. They were so good to teach us about Jesus. They taught us about the Jesus that did all these wonderful miracles and healings and great things during Bible times. Somehow, though, they didn't convey that this thing still happens today. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Come on. It's the kind that believes that what Jesus did on the cross, that was not just for then, but it's for today, tomorrow, and forever. That it doesn't stop. Let's keep going. He said we would do these things and greater, so let's see those things. Yeah. Jesus. Sergio's sermon was fairly simple, but it was powerful. At the end of the sermon, he did an altar call, and he called up everyone who had an incurable disease. Before I knew what I was doing, I booked it to the front of the church. Yeah. Sergio laid hands on me, and he prayed. And although I felt nothing, I had an encounter with hope that day. Yeah. I chose to believe, and hope was infused. I began to walk out my healing from fibromyalgia, daily praising God for healing me, and believing that while nothing seemed to be manifesting in the physical, that something had to be happening. Yeah. I never let go of hope, and a couple years later, I was free from fibromyalgia. Amen. Praise Jesus. Yeah. Woo! Yay. That leads me to my final step. Step number 3. Submit to the process. When Naaman finally got to Elisha, the person who supposedly had his promise, Elisha did not respond the way that Naaman expected him to. Naaman's pride was wounded, and he got offended. Naaman became angry, and in his offense, he stomped off in a rage. Now you need to catch this. Listen closely to what I'm fixing to say. Naaman's pride, Naaman's offense almost cost him his healing. Yeah. Fortunately for him, he had officers that reasoned with him and encouraged him to keep chasing after his promise and do what the prophet had said. Yeah. There must have been something inside of Naaman, deep inside of him, that compelled this mighty warrior to push through offense, through humiliation, and to keep pressing in and pressing on. Finally, Naaman obeyed Elisha, and he submitted to the process. As Naaman submitted to the process and began to walk out the process, his hope grew. When Naaman submitted to God's command, he was healed.
Yeah.
It was when he put his faith and his hope into action that healing came. In 2003, our oldest son, Brendan, was born. We were in a public setting, and we heard a kid screaming in the background. We'd always pray, please let that not be our Brendan that caused that. But to our dismay, about 90% of the time it was. We began to call him Destructo Boy, because he was always breaking and destroying things. We loved Brendan so deeply and so dearly. He was ours, and we are his. We are so fond of him. We are so proud of him. We never once differentiated between him and our younger son, Corbin, who was born 16 months later. In fact, Brendan probably doesn't need close treatment, as often happens whenever we have a kid with a lot of medical disabilities. To be honest, it was exhausting trying to keep up with Brendan's erratic behavior and his moods. He was constantly sick. We were always in and out of doctor's offices, hospitals, having procedures. By the time he was about 7.5 years old, he had probably had about 10 to 12 surgeries. It's a lot. But God.
Yeah.
He sent a messenger of hope. Her name was Bonnie Chavda, and she released hope over our family. In 2011, we were at a conference, and Bonnie was preaching, and she called me up, and she looked me in the eye, and she declared that my son would be healed from autism.
Yeah.
That day, our family grabbed a hold of hope. We began seeking the promise and submitting to the process.
Yeah.
So listen, looks different for every family. I'm not telling you what to do and what not to do, but I'll tell you what our family did. We went up for every single altar call, no matter what it was for. If they called for paralytics, we rushed the altar. If they called for finances, we were there. If they called for a purple elephant with yellow polka dots, we hightailed it to the front. I'm obviously kidding about that last one. But the reality is that if God was moving, there was no way, no how, that we would let our pride, our insecurities, or our inabilities stand in the way of our child being healed.
Yeah.
It was humiliating, it was exhausting, but it was one of the most beautiful, most precious seasons of our life, because it was in this time that we learned how to trust God in the waiting and in the process. We learned how to lean into his promises, even when they seem so far off. Every Sunday, after church, nevertheless, never failing, someone would come up to us. Hey, has Brigham been healed of autism? And our response every Sunday was, well, it doesn't appear this Sunday was the Sunday. However, we are trusting God to complete what he started. We are believing him for his full healing.
Yeah.
And we're celebrating small victories. For 2 years, we humbled ourselves, dipping over and over and